This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to educator.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to have Robert Plotkin on the show. He is a leading expert when it comes to leveraging AI, which we're going to talk about his new book, The Genie and the Machine, which is the first and only book that I'm aware of that addresses the impacts of generative AI. He's also a patent attorney, which we're going to talk about software patents and IP, which is going to be pretty cool. And he hosts a podcast, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit as we go today. Anyway, with all that being said, Robert, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, John. Thanks for having me.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background, how you got into AI, and why you wrote this book.
Yeah. So my background is I've been a patent attorney for over 25 years, specializing in software patents. But even before that, my background is in computer science. Started programming as a kid in the early 80s. I studied computer science at MIT. I ended up not to pursue software development directly as a career. I went into law, but that whole time, so you could say over 40 years, I've been in the computer world one way or another. The book actually I published back in 2009.
Oh, wow.
I started seeing in the 2000s how people were using AI. It wasn't being called generative AI back then. Mostly it was evolutionary and genetic algorithms, a little bit of use of neural networks back then to semi-automate the inventive process, to help design things like circuits and antennas, even some automatic writing of software code back then. And there were some people starting to obtain patents on inventions that were generated using AI. So as a patent lawyer and computer scientist, I got really fascinated with that and with the implications of automated inventing for patenting. Raised questions like, can an invention that was created using AI be patented? And if so, should the legal rules need to change or adapt? And so that's what the book was about back then. Was really excited in the last few years as people have gotten more interested in these questions. There is someone named Stephen Thaler who has filed a bunch of patent applications around the world for some inventions, a beverage container and this light-emitting device that he created using some neural network-based software of his. And he has named his software as the inventor on the patent applications in an attempt to get the patent offices to list an AI system as an inventor. Now, he has not succeeded. His attempts have failed, but it's really helped push forward the conversation about patenting of AI. His inventions may have been patentable, but what the courts and patent offices have been saying is you still have to name a human as the inventor in those cases. I am working on a second book, planning for it to be published in the next few months. That's going to be a massive update in light of everything that's happened in AI in the last couple of years, particularly the last year. It'll focus on strategies for obtaining patents for AI technology itself and for inventions that are created with the assistance of AI.
So if we create software today, I know using Microsoft tools, you have Copilot, and that makes writing code a lot easier. It can give you suggestions on how to do certain algorithms or something that you want to do that you're not exactly sure how to do, and put that in there. Do we have to disclose that is being used today if we want a software patent?
In a patent application, you don't necessarily need to disclose how you invented the invention, whether it be because it was created using AI or in some other way. Like if you just conducted physical experiments to create a mousetrap, you don't have to describe the physical experiments that you conducted. What you're required to do is to explain to someone how to make a working version of the invention and how to use it. And that may not require, in many cases, it won't require describing how you came up with the invention in the first place. So the short answer is no, although in some cases, like let's say the invention that you're trying to obtain a patent on is a new kind of algorithm for training a model, like a neural network. Well, in that case, the method itself that you're patenting may be the very method that you used in the process of inventing it. And in that case, you'll have to disclose that method in the patent application.
Okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So what have you seen change over the last couple of years as, we've had this uptick in generative AI when it comes to, your job as a patent attorney? What has changed?
Yeah, one thing that's changed is certainly in the last year or two, particularly since that pivotal launch date of ChatGPT, is I've seen many more people using large language models in the process of innovation. And one thing that's interesting about not just large language models, but many types of AI, is that they can be unpredictable. They're not deterministic. And so when it comes to patenting things that are created with their assistance, you have to take that into account because, as I said, you need to be able to describe in a patent how to make and use something in a way that can be relied upon. And so you have to really think carefully about this unreliability aspect. The other thing that's very exciting is that large language models, because particularly through a chat interface like ChatGPT, you can instruct it using natural language and you get outputs in natural language. So I found it is democratizing the innovative process. It's enabling people who don't have deep technical backgrounds necessarily, who aren't coders necessarily, to get involved more in the innovative process because they can come to something like ChatGPT with an idea and leverage it to help work out the details. That is a very exciting thing. I started writing about that in the book many years ago, this democratizing effect. I mean, you mentioned even for people who are coders, it can help relieve you of a lot of the drudgery or doing certain low-level coding work. And that's just a general feature that's remained the same over all this time, is that as the technology gets better and better at doing the low-level design work, it both pushes people to do design at a higher level, and you could say frees them to do the work at a higher level and not have to get bogged down in the details. I'll just tell you, I know in the book, I found it fun to do historical research. I mean, this goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. I remember learning that astronomers, this is back in the 16th and 17th century, a large part of what they did was manually calculate logarithms, right? And then people developed printed logarithm tables in handwritten books. And that was such a boon to astronomers to not have to calculate those by hand, right? That moved them up a small level of abstraction in the work they did. Just think about how many levels up we've gone since then. And I'm sure that's just going to keep happening on and on into the future. And I say that because whenever there's some big advance, like there's been in the last year or so, people tend to think, oh no, what work is going to be left for humans to do? Now that the technology can automate what we were just doing recently. And the answer is there will be a next level that humans can go to in abstraction and in power. And that I believe that will keep going forever.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I like the word that you use, freeing, because some people say, oh, you're just, letting it do your job for you. I'm like, no, it's freeing me up to do higher level tasks and a greater thing than what I'm doing now. Do you think, how do you think we should handle or deal with the fear that comes with generative AI? Because there's definitely some people that are concerned about it taking their jobs.
It's very real and legitimate fear. I'd say there's two sides. So first of all, I just want to acknowledge that fear comes up in every conversation I have. with people about generative AI. And because of how rapidly the technology has been advancing in the last few years, and I'll say again in the last year in particular in the public sphere, it's very real. When you look at a technology and you see, oh, this is able to do some substantial number of tasks that until now I have been doing in my own work and that people have been paying me for, what am I going to do? So it's a real fear. I often point to, there's this American folk legend of John Henry, which arose in response to the steam engine in the mid 1800s, when people were afraid, rightfully so, of their manual labor being replaced by steam-driven tools. I mean, this goes back a very, very long way. So what I would say to people is learn how to use the latest generation of technology to boost your own skills. That's your best protection against being replaced by technology. So see it as a partner or a collaborator or as a tool that you can use to boost your own efficiency and effectiveness. And very often that takes the form of, if you see generative AI, for example, as taking your place. Okay, you used to do a lot of manual coding, for example, and now it can do that by you giving it the description of a function you want to perform, and it'll write the code to perform that function. Well, think about, what skills would you need to be your own supervisor? What are the skills that someone who's currently your boss or your supervisor or your customer need to instruct you? Those are often very much the same skills you will need to instruct the AI. So it's a good heuristic. Think through what would make someone a good boss of the old you, the you before AI. Learn those skills, gain those managerial skills, higher level design skills, and then learn the details of how to apply those to AI, and that will help, really keep you in demand.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think I think the fear is people get comfortable with what they do, and change is the thing that scares people. And we've seen that if you go back in history. I'm a history minor, so I love history and looking back at old things. But there was a fear when trains were going faster that if we went over 35 miles per hour, that the human body couldn't handle that. We would die. So there is this tradition of fear as technology advances, and I still think ChatGPT and the use of generative AI, whether it be making images with all the different things that are out there now with Adobe Firefly or whatever people are using these days, you can advance what you're working on so much faster than you could without them. And a lot of it's just getting that idea, getting things started. Like, I'm not very good at fleshing out the outline of something that I want to write, but I can tell you, here's the idea that I want to come across. Give me an outline, and I look at it and I can say, well, that sucks. Let me cut that out. That one's pretty good. I'm going to take that and flesh that out some more. And I've been able to increase my productivity, significantly when it comes to writing things, just by having someone, i.e. something, ChatGPT, give me that outline and that starting point.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't emphasize enough the value of using ChatGPT and other tools for what you just said, which is just getting started. As a writer, I would say it's the problem of the blank page. Sitting in front of a blank page is the hardest thing, and getting the first few words written is the hardest thing. And if you can use a tool like that, as you said, to give you a starting point, it actually doesn't matter so much how good the starting point is. As long as it's decent, it can really help you get started. And then as long as it is good enough, it could probably even be average, by enabling you to get past that hurdle of writing the first words. It can boost your productivity really significantly.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And I've been finding new uses for it, like just on a regular basis. We're planning a trip, and I would just go, like yesterday, I was trying to plan my trip and figure out, like, well, okay, we're doing this long European cruise and stopping in all these different cities. And I was looking at the times. I was like, well, we stopped there at one city at 7 a.m. We get back on the boat at 3. I'm like, what tourist activities is there to do in this city between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m.?
Mm-hmm.
And we know, like, not only can ChatGPT 4 go and find things that are out there, it can tell me that, oh, well, if I'm looking at the hours of operation and these are the ones that are available during that time. So saving me a significant amount of time versus just searching and opening up websites, trying to find out when they're opening. Again, it's just helping me get that starting point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and another skill is the skill of knowing what tool to use. I mean, we keep saying ChatGPT because it is quite good at a lot of things, but it's not great at everything. And there are some specific tools that are better at certain things. Maybe I'm sure you or your listeners have heard Stephen Wolfram talk about the benefits of using his own tools for doing precise mathematical calculations, which we know large language models often don't get right. But if you mix together the general power of a large language model with the precision of a high quality mathematical engine, like available from Wolfram, and either you manually choose which one of them to use at a certain time, or you let a tool like ChatGPT with a plugin choose which of those to use, then you can get the best of both worlds. And I know that at the commercial level, there's a lot of value still to be had in having experts or professionals design systems that can draw on a variety of different tools, including large language models, and know when and how to use each of those to perform different functions, especially in contexts that are safety critical, where you can't rely on a large language model generically like we might be able to do in our daily lives. And so that's just another way in which human skill and expertise is needed for the selection and configuration of different tools and the stitching of them together, putting the glue together. All of these humans are very, very much needed for and will continue to be needed for.
Yeah, I remember I was having a conversation with someone not too long ago. We were talking about AI, and they were talking about how it's scary for them and they're not going to use it. And I said, do you ever watch Star Trek? And they're like, yeah. I said, do you know how, like, in Next Generation, they would just say computer, and they would ask a question and get an answer back? I said, that's exactly what we're doing here. Like, it's what it is. You wanted that as a child. Now that you have it, you're afraid of it. Like, it makes no sense to me. But I think you hit on a really good point of knowing the right tools to use. And I don't know if you've heard of it. There's a company out there called Consensus AI, I believe it is. And they've trained their language models just on published work. I'm sorry, peer-reviewed work, which is really awesome because you get actually, back when you were doing research papers and you had to go look up, an article and write the, citations for it, you get all that back from your responses whenever you ask it a question, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and look, I'm a lawyer. I talk to a lot of lawyers who understandably are very concerned about the accuracy of large language model-based tools. There was a case back in May or June of a lawyer somewhere who submitted a brief to a court that he had written using ChatGPT, and it cited to cases that did not exist. So apparently he had not proofread it or double-checked its work, and this has become the nightmare of lawyers, to find that they do something like that. But unfortunately, I found a lot of lawyers who say, well, therefore, I'm just not going to ever use a tool like this. So, one response is for people to become more educated about best ways to use it. The other response is coming from technology vendors. Just recently, the two major legal software research companies, LexisNexis and Westlaw, announced versions of their own tools that are claiming to provide the best of both worlds: natural language, large language model input and output with some sort of accuracy checking. I suspect you provide a natural language query, they're probably using it to search their own database of cases, kind of like you said, with peer-reviewed cases. So they're controlling what the sources are. Maybe they've trained the large language model on their database. I'm not sure. And then on the output side, I don't know if they're just purely providing the output or if they're then checking the output again against the database. But, that's the kind of thing I think we'll expect to see a lot more of, is use case specific or industry specific tools that address the particular needs, like accuracy in law or in medicine or in other fields. We're still at the infancy. If you think about this, if you think of the start date as if it was the release of ChatGPT, probably almost literally a year ago to the day, we're still very, very early days. And I see every reason to believe companies will be addressing a lot of these concerns in the near future.
Yeah, speaking of concerns, one of the things that always comes up is biases that are somehow baked into AI or come about based off of, information that the AI is reading. It develops biases from time to time. What are some things that we need to be worried about? How can we overcome some of these?
Well, there definitely are real biases. From a computer science or mathematical point of view, you would say the bias is just in the direction of whatever the system was trained on. But then the other kind of bias people are really legitimately concerned about is what we colloquially call bias: racial, ethnic bias, gender bias. And all of those things do come out. I know that OpenAI said when it was first internally testing GPT-3, before they released it, they found a lot of its output was, maybe not a lot, but enough of its output had racial or ethnic bias in it. Why? It was trained on the internet, and you find that on the internet because it's what people are saying. So the language model will just replicate what is in human created content. So there's a couple of ways to address it. One is to change the training data that you're training on and try to either eliminate those sources of bias from the training data or filter them out at the training side of things. And I know a lot of companies are doing that. And the other is on the output side, which is when the system generates a response, before you show it to the user, you filter it or revise it or something like that to change. So both of those are being done, I know. And I know I've seen a lot of this with images. People have done some tests where they've generate a picture of a corporate board, and it's then shows mostly men, mostly white men. I think even it might have been OpenAI recently did some things to introduce diversity into images when a generic request is made for an image containing people, to not, have the output be biased towards a certain type of people. And I think I saw that one way they're doing that, like DALL-E 3 is an interesting way of generating images. You type in a prompt and then, or a request for a type of image, and then it generates its own prompt, right? And I think that what they're doing now is the prompt that it generates automatically, but based on what you as the user asked, is interjecting some diversity into it, unless you specifically ask for an image of a white man or there are a bunch of ways to do it. And I think, the other thing is that we need to make sure that there's a wider range of people representing a broader, diverse range of perspectives and backgrounds at the table developing the technology. Technology tends to embody the perspectives and biases of the people who develop it, often unintentionally. And the wider range of people we can get to the table in influencing and developing the next generation of technology, I think the more we'll address this concern.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's a good approach. And I've seen that too. I've been playing around with a whole bunch of different AI models and tools. And one of the ones that I've noticed, like in Bing Chat Enterprise Edition, whenever you search for something there, it does what you're saying. It basically takes your prompt and rewards it, and then you can see what it rewarded it to, and then prompts it, and that's where you get your response back, which just takes out some of the noise that you may unintentionally put in there.
And that's a nice approach in that it addresses this bias issue while also being transparent about how it's doing that, and then it means it gives you as the user the opportunity to override what it's done if you don't like it. So it has that's a nice approach, rather than just, let's say, creating an internal revision to your prompt that you never get to see.
Yeah, I think transparency is really important when it comes to these generative models. And that's one of the things that I think is lacking with, especially some of the image creation, like with Dolly and W Firefly, things like that. You don't know what the real sources are that it's using to help generation of those things.
Yeah. And I think we'll probably see a lot more of that. And I know there's a really healthy debate and discussion going on about proprietary versus open source models generally. I know, most of the discussion, understandably, tends to focus on the small number of really popular models like GPT or Llama, but there are hundreds of thousands of models out there for text and image and other purposes, and it's really important for people to become aware of those, whether as end users or as developers, to understand the options that are out there, including open source models. And it's great that there's becoming more and more resources available for people, companies to train their own models, which would give them the ability to influence what data goes in and therefore what comes out.
Yeah. So when, being the fact that you've been kind of following this whole AI, computer generated software and tools and things like that for a long time, were you surprised with how most of the things that people are using AI for these days is actually creative endeavors? Whereas, I remember 5-10 years ago, maybe even further along than that, we always thought AI was going to be replacing the physical labor. We thought it'd be replacing, drivers first. And then, you had robots in factories and that would replace the people that are operating the robots. And, eventually we would get rid of no physical labor. But we always thought that creative aspect was a human, unique aspect that has to be there. Humans have to be the ones to write the stories and make the movies and things like that. Now we're seeing AI kind of take over a lot of that.
Well, I both was and wasn't surprised. And I'll tell you what I wasn't surprised by was the ability of AI to come up with new written works or designs for machines or new kinds of code that could be as creative, so to speak, as a human. Because when I was working on the book, I interviewed about 40 people. This was back in the mid to late 2000s. As I said, most people back then were using genetic and evolutionary algorithms, which essentially take some set of parameters. Let's say you're trying to design a drug, and they explore possibilities, explore different possible designs, evaluate them for fitness or for how well they perform a certain function, and then make revisions to that, let's say a molecular structure, and then simulate those, evaluate those, refine those, and do all of that often purely in simulation, sometimes in combination with physical experiments. So it's a kind of automated experimentation and evaluation process that, particularly when it's done entirely in silico or in a computer, can be done extremely rapidly and test huge numbers of possibilities. And it's not surprising then that a computer might be able to come up with a design that either a human would never have come up with because they just wouldn't have the time or the resources, because the computer can explore such a large space of possibilities. Also because the computer, because it works so systematically, actually often will not have the biases that a human would have when working that way. I mean, we talk a lot about the problem of bias that computers have these days. When I was working on the book, what I came across again and again was people telling me, human engineers, human inventors have a lot of biases. And I'm not talking about racial or ethnic biases. I'm talking about there's ways of coming up with new ideas and approaches that they've either learned in school or they've come up with on their own based on experience. They have certain types of intuitions. When you're designing a circuit about what component might work for a certain purpose. And what that means is they tend not to explore possibilities that don't fit within their existing mental playbook. And a computer, an evolutionary algorithm, doesn't have any of those. It just keeps trying out things So you inject some randomness, test it out. It has no bias one way or the other. There was an example I used in the book, and I had a photo of it. It was an antenna created by a team at NASA. And the reason I put the photo of it was the antenna had this very bizarre shape. It looked almost like a random set of bends and twists and turns in the shape of the antenna. And it's nothing like what you might think of designing. You think of a traditional rabbit ear antenna or a Y or some other very structured shape. This had a very bizarre shape that a human probably would never have thought of even trying out. But the software did because it was just in an unbiased way exploring possibilities. So in that way, I was not surprised in the last couple of years with what we're now calling generative AI, that it could sort of either mimic human creativity or come up with new things that were at least as good as human creativity. What I was surprised by was that large language models would be doing it. Yeah. That really did take me by surprise. I had done a lot of work and patents involving language models, particularly in the speech recognition context. And my experience with them was not for generative purposes. It was for doing things like speech recognition, predicting what word in text might represent what was spoken. And although those kinds of language models do predict things like the next word or the next few words and so forth, and I was familiar with how those worked, it really took me by surprise when I first saw ChatGPT that a tool like that could be writing an entire essay, particularly based on a description of something like a concept, and particularly that it could follow an instruction and not just complete a sentence. That really took me by surprise. I was a little relieved to learn, when I say relieved, because otherwise it would have been almost scary how good it was. When I learned that OpenAI specifically had to train its models to follow instructions. I hear people a lot saying, oh, these models like GPT-3 and 4, they just complete a sentence. They just predict what word comes next. But OpenAI actually found that when they trained their models just on doing that, they did quite well at completing a sentence. But when you told it, write me a blog post about the following topic, where what you're asking it to do is not really complete the sentence you give it. You're asking it to follow instruction. It did not do quite well. And what they did was spend, I don't know how many thousands or more of human labor hours using reinforcement learning with human feedback to specifically develop a modified version of, I think it was GPT-3 or 3.5, that was trained on following instructions. And that's when it finally got good enough to do what we saw it doing starting last year. So it actually comes back to the fact that there's always a need for people.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And I think, I know for me, one of the, aha moments that I saw with AI doing kind of creative task was when I saw it first create a trailer. And, we were looking at movies and, teams spend weeks building a trailer, watching the movie, finding all the exciting parts, cutting them out, putting them in there. And I think it was Adobe that demoed it at CES or something like that, where they, or maybe it was at NAB, I don't remember exactly what show it was, and they demoed it, but they took a movie and ran it right through one of their AI, generative AI tools, and it came out with a 3-minute trailer that was almost as good as anything that I've seen anyone put together, because it took it was able to learn where the exciting parts of the movie is and where the emotional parts, and obviously based off of training, lots of training, of saying this is, an important scene, this is not an important scene. And it was able to take those things and put those together in a way with its own, music that it was creating off of the score that was there, and produce this beautiful 3-minute trailer of, a 3-hour movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there are things that we've all seen other people do or have done ourselves, I think, over the last year, that are extremely eye-opening. I I always tell people I don't feel quite as bad about my own inability to have predicted this. When I started using ChatGPT, I was really, really taken by surprise. I thought I understood what the state of the technology was before that, and when I started using ChatGPT, I realized I was wrong and I had not seen this coming. But I've listened to some great interviews with Bill Gates and Stephen Wolfram, both saying they had the same experience. So I feel like I'm in good company and don't feel so bad. There's a great interview. I found it somewhere online with Bill Gates talking about when the OpenAI team came to his house in the summer of 2022 to show him, I think it was GPT-4, because he had told them, Microsoft was closely involved with their development. He had said to them, don't come back to me for a while until you sort of have something that can, I believe, score really high on standardized tests or something else. And so they finally felt confident enough that they had something, and they went to his house and they showed him GPT-4. And he said, I did not expect this to exist yet. I thought we were still 5 or 10 years away, at least, from a technology like that. So if he could be taken by surprise, again, I don't feel bad that I was, but it just shows you it's why we are all reeling a little bit. It's, again, why I understand the fear about being replaced when you see a leap forward that's this significant almost overnight. And although the leaps, I think, in the last year haven't been as big, we see new developments on almost a daily basis. It's quite incredible. And so it just it reinforces the need for all of us to stay on top of it and learn how to use all of this to leverage what the latest that's out there, so we can both, become more productive and efficient and effective, and make good use of it, and to stay valuable.
Yeah, I think staying valuable is, one of those things that we definitely need to pay attention to. And, I see this as just a great opportunity, not something to be afraid of, but it's a great opportunity to leverage what's out there, learn about it, and, advance your career, whether you're in a creative profession or, some other profession. We all have to have some kind of creativity behind our work, whether we're, solving problems or whatever we're doing. We have some type of creativity, and I think it's a great time to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing I'll say on that point is, if we all have strengths and weaknesses, it's a great opportunity to look at where am I not strong. You mentioned trailers. I'm not an artist. I'm much more of a writer, but often I'm writing something and I think, I'm sure there could be a really good graphic or chart or image that could convey the concept that I'm writing about in visually. But I have no ability to come up with it. And I've often used ChatGPT to help me brainstorm on that kinds of things. It may not come up with the best final piece of art, but it's filling a gap in my skill that can help me move that visual idea forward in a way that I can then go to an artist with. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for that. And then for re-envisioning teams as well. We recognize, who do we have on the team? What are everyone's strengths and weaknesses? How can we supplement or augment that with the strengths and weaknesses of AI, and then put together a human and AI team that enables everyone to do their best, helps people to learn? I mean, there's just so many new opportunities here. It's very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a great conversation. How can people maybe find out more about what you're doing, connect with you online, and pick up a copy of your book?
Yeah. So if you want to stay on top with all the latest postings, I'm frequently on LinkedIn. So that's at linkedin.com/in/Robert Plotkin. And then at my law firm, where we obtain patents for software, including a lot of patents for AI, I'm at blueshiftip.com. The name of my law firm is Blue Shift IP. The book is available on Amazon. It's called The Genie in the Machine: How Computer Automated Inventing is Revolutionizing Law and Business. As I mentioned, the new book, as yet unnamed, will be coming out in a few months. It's going to be targeted specifically at founders, executives, and investors in AI companies on how they can obtain maximum intellectual property protection for their AI technologies in order to help do things like raise money, position themselves for an acquisition, and protect themselves against competitors. So if you stay attuned to my LinkedIn page and the law firm website, you'll see the announcements as that book gets closer to being released.
Awesome. And whenever you get a release date for that, I'd love to have you back on the show so we can talk more about that and what we need to pay attention to if we are a founder or investor in an AI company.
Great. Well, I'd love to come back, John. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to, click on their links, and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. And make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.